sure thing. Change, change. Expect a miracle change. Watch me change when you change the way you look at things. The things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now do 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 change. Do 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 change. Do 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 change. Do 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 do.
The views and opinions of our guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of New Thought Media Network, or any organization we may be affiliated with. Here at New Thought Media Network, we welcome freedom of speech and courageous conversations. There are many topics that can be difficult to navigate. Challenging the status quo and engaging in lively debate is important to expanding our understanding of one another, and life in general. Creating a peaceful world doesn't happen because no one disagrees, it happens from a willingness to understanding one another. In our programming, we strive to expand consciousness and assist people in creating remarkable lives. Your comments are welcome at info@ntmedia.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to Spirit Cafe Show. I'm Barbara Jean,
And I'm Mark Dupuy. So happy to be here.
and we're so grateful to be here with you today, sharing courageous conversations. And I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. So we're standing on the land known as Toronto, and we stand with reverence, committed to sharing of this land. We acknowledge the genocide created here, and we choose to courageously move along a new path, creating reconciliation. This land was stolen from the Anishinaabe. European settlers stole their culture, their language, their spirituality, and their children. And today, Toronto is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties, and it is the traditional territory of many First People, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And still today, the First People are struggling to be seen and heard. Colonization has created a system of destruction to our First People and to the people forcibly brought here through the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Toronto was built on stolen land with stolen labor of Black, Indigenous, and racialized people. And in our desire for reconciliation, we honor the dish with one spoon wampum treaty and agree to peaceably share and care for this land and her people. We are committed to the active dismantling of the colonial system. We are committed to the dismantling of all forms of racism. So I invite you to just take a moment right now to acknowledge your personal commitment to the land that you're on and the path you choose to walk going forward. Miigwech. Thank you. Mark.
Miigwech. Thank you, Barbara. So our Spirit Cafe show is about empowering authenticity through courageous conversations. Today, our guest is Brian Bachand, and he will be talking to us about conflict with family members, conditional and unconditional love. But before we go in, I'll introduce him with a short bio. Brian, guided by a strong divine presence and a faith-oriented upbringing, felt called to become a Catholic priest. He served 4 years happily in a parish and 4 years as a private secretary for a cardinal. Brian's joy came from helping others connect to the divine in their life and to the lives to live with deeper clarity. Until, while out for a walk one evening, his path took a turn. A simple moment led to a new realization. he saw two couples sharing a heartfelt goodbye. As they parted ways, it was as if the world stood still for Brian. I'm getting goosebumps. In his heart, he knew he longed for a life like theirs, to love, share his gifts, and create new, soulful reality. He left the priesthood, and every step he takes has brought him to this now moment. He served as an executive director for two North America's largest organizations, leading teams and raising substantial funds, became a partner in executive search, and then launched his own company, Evolution. After his business launch, the world grappled with an unexpected global pandemic. I see a theme here, fundamentally reshaping our lives. His life was reshaped, I think. During these uncertain times, he couldn't help but recognize the evolution of humanity. People were waking to a deeper sense of their personal mission and how they wish to be in the world at this time. Welcome, Brian.
Hello there.
Wow.
Hello,
You,
Barb. Hello, Mark. Nice to be with you.
Nice
you've
to be
done
with you.
lots. You've been a busy person there, Brian.
You know, just filling up my time. Just filling up my time.
I love it. And I love the idea of being in service, because that's really what ministry is about, but it's also what coaching and everything's about as well. So, and even what we do here is being in service. So,
Mhm.
conditional and unconditional love. What do you got to say about that?
Holy smokes. I think we need longer than an hour. But I think, just in a nutshell, first of all, again, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here with your community and audience. So a special hello to everyone who is listening. I think, we're destined in our creation of who we are to live in unconditional love. Our whole purpose in life is to return to love, to be love, to show that love. However, sometimes the human condition and the families we're born into or life experiences that we have can lead us to experiencing unconditional love, whether that
Yeah.
is, the way you're treated because of how you identify, decisions you make. If you do something, then you'll be loved a certain way. And so it's something that we learn. I think we come into the world to love unconditionally, but I think we experience in the human condition quite quickly a conditional love in different forms in our life, and it impacts us. But it's also the invitation to grow. It's also the invitation to evolve, and it's also the invitation to return back to love.
Yeah, I
Mm.
really like that, because I think the idea of love is such a confusing concept to most people. What does it actually mean? And I read something today that I really liked, and it was about love is doing whatever's needed
Hmm.
in whatever situation without judging it, or, it's like if somebody needs something, you're there for them regardless if you know them or don't know them. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter. Like, if you're going to create something wonderful. So how do we deal with the idea of family conflict then,
Mm.
in the midst of unconditional love? I come
So,
from a family that has conditions. I don't know about
yeah.
everybody else, but
Yeah, I think, I don't think any family that comes together that, I don't think they strategize as parents. We're going to be conditional parents. We're going to love conditionally. I don't think, any family consciously makes that decision. I think what happens is, you know, either the wounds or the life experience that they have, they're brought into that. You know what I mean? And that's how they work and they live out of. I also firmly believe that on a deeply kind of spiritual level, in many ways, we choose the families that we're born into
I agree.
to learn, to learn lessons, and oftentimes it's to learn about love and conditional and unconditional. So I think, it is something that, because you may have had an unconditional experience, especially if it's from a parent,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that you cannot heal and grow to have a unconditional love in your
Right.
life. and
Mhm.
and I think it's not always easy. It's not always easy, and it does take personal ownership to be able to recognize that, to be able to forgive, to be able to do the work and to move forward. But oftentimes those situations, even though they can be extremely painful and
Right.
impactful, can bring you back to a love that you deserve.
S-
Oh,
I'm wondering, not necessarily your, family of origin. Um, you left the priesthood, and I would guess that that was a difficult decision, and there may have been a time that you thought people would judge maybe your decision to leave, and perhaps create some conflict and an opportunity to go through the conflict resolution. Can you share any of that experience
Absolutely.
and relate
Yeah.
it to?
Yeah. So I think, for myself, it's funny, I really, I enjoyed my seminary training, which was, 5 years. I enjoyed and loved, and to use that word, loved in many ways being a priest, when I was in the parish, and when I worked for 4 years, with a cardinal as their private secretary, but I loved that work. But I, came to a moment I wanted to stand in my own truth. I wanted to be able to love another person. I wanted to be stand in my truth as a gay man, bring my gifts to the world in a new way. And so, when I made the decision to leave, and I did that decision, and it was over a year later when I actually left, I did a lot of the inner work. You know, in many ways, leaving the priesthood is leaving an extension of your family, because there was a very strong bond there. And I experienced profound conditional and unconditional love. Definitely family. We can certainly come back to that. We have an hour, so we'll come back to that conversation. But among priests, it's very interesting, and it's a common theme. When I left, there were many priests that just cut you immediately out. It's almost like, because
Mm,
you've left, whether because it strikes a nerve within them of maybe something they would like to do and they're fearful to do, or there's a sense there that, you've abandoned, something you're supposed to be part of. Many of them just cut you off very, very coldly, and
mm,
and you never hear from. And it's very interesting when you think about it. As a priest, you're supposed to be like another Christ, in persona Christi, and it's the most unchrist-like actions you can encounter. At the same time, I did also encounter, from two, actually three friends, who knew me for many years going back to university. I performed their weddings, baptized some of their children. And when I shared with them that I was leaving, and also shared with them that I was gay and I was leaving and where I was at, they became quite hostile.
mm,
A
wow.
couple of them very hostile. And, saying things that, when I really think about it, I'm so grateful I had done a lot of that inner work, that it didn't impede me from making the decision or doubt it. It really, I was able to be strong, but it really showed how much they had kind of put me into a box, and really said things like, I'm really concerned for your soul. I want you in heaven. This is,
mm,
really typical things. And I remember saying to one of them, I said, you know what? I said, I love you. I'm grateful for our friendship, but we need to just end things there,
mm.
because I'm in a very different place. And never heard from a couple of them ever again after that. And I'm peaceful with that, but it's on them. So it was interesting. Yeah, and these are people that are churchgoers and, all these things. And that's the part that I'm like, very
Interesting.
conditional. Yeah, very much so.
I read a book called The Wisdom Jesus, and a quote in the beginning of that book from a British writer, I can't remember his name. He said, Christianity has not failed, it just has not been tried yet.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? There's all these people saying, I'm Christian, but they're not following the path that Jesus walked, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the defining principle of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Love others as you would love yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Love
And
one
again,
another.
you raise a great point on that. Again, when I look at those individuals, it says more about them and their
It does.
family dynamic, or how
Yeah.
they've received love, or how they perceive God's love. So, you know,
Yeah.
it all ties back to that. But to be on the
It is
receiving end of it, is it's
a
always
little tough.
different. Yeah, it's always different.
Mhm.
And the thing is, as a priest or minister or whatever, people have a habit of sitting you up on a pedestal somewhere.
Hmm.
And it's really painful when they kick it out from under you.
Yeah,
Which is
or I think there's just a sense there, and I can understand where, some of them were coming from. One of them, I was very close to the husband for many, many years, or a student. I did their wedding. I baptized their children. I understand, and their faith was very important to them. And so to have someone that all of a sudden now is shaking that foundation in many ways, I can understand,
yeah,
where they're coming from. And I remember when I spoke with one of them, I said to them, I said, you can ask me any question you want. You can ask me anything. I said, however, you also need to be prepared for the answer. So
yeah,
that was, something that I think they weren't expecting that. I think but I said, you can ask me anything, but be prepared for the answer. So,
yeah. The answer might be something you're not particularly comfortable with.
yes.
Yeah,
And did they ask?
Well, it was funny. They did. And then some of them, they kind of stopped a little bit. And then they kind of they came back a little bit. Um, and it's been interesting too. There's one of them that has tried to reach out a couple of times over the years. I've been out of the priesthood. I resigned freely 16 years ago. And I would say there's been over two occasions that they've kind of, it's like, I always call them like on a ship on the ocean, they send up a flare, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, so they reached out and both times agreed, yeah, let's have a conversation. And I had a sense, I'm like, this is more about them than it is about me. And
absolutely.
and both times canceled, like with like an hour of the call. And that's okay. I said that's just where they are. So yeah.
I think that's a really important piece when it comes to any kind of conflict is to acknowledge that whatever a person is going through is personal to them. And only where I take ownership of it is it personal to me.
Hmm.
And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge that because you're upset about my choices doesn't mean I'm wrong and bad. It just means that you're in my lane of
Hmm.
which you only have part of the information.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
not everybody would probably understand why you left. Even if you explain it, it still wouldn't make sense necessarily. But to you, of course, it does. It's the right thing. You know in your heart that it's the right thing.
Right. But on the flip side, I had a magnificent unconditional experience
Yeah,
with my parishioners. So, I was in a parish for 4 years and then went
yeah.
on to work for the cardinal before. But when parishioners found out that I was leaving, they reached out, several of them. And to this day, I'm still in communication with so many of them. They were
Nice.
unconditional. So it was very interesting. I found the people unconditional. I found the hierarchy and priests very conditional.
Conditional.
So it was a very interesting. So to this day, I'm still in touch with so many of them that,
Yeah.
have connected with, and that's been beautiful. But that was a really big insight, very
Mm.
big insight.
Wow.
What speaks loudly to me there, what I'm hearing is fear. So the parishioners humanized you.
Hmm.
This me just spewing here, and your peers were afraid because wait a second, you're not supposed to be human. And so if you show your humanness, then what are we to do?
I think you struck a chord there. And I think for many of the priests,
Yeah.
it struck into that fear of like, well, I'm struggling with some of the same thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I think so. But I do want to say as well, I mean, there have been several priests that have kept in touch.
Yeah.
And the most important one, including the cardinal, who has been a beautiful friend for all these 16 years. We always call each other on each other's birthday. I had coffee with him
Mm.
this summer when I, saw him. Um, he was a beautiful example of
Right.
unconditional love and support, and something I truly treasure. And I'm so grateful for him. He was absolutely beautiful.
Awesome.
That's the best because I think that's what we need when we've made a decision to change something in our lives. It hasn't happened just by accident.
Hmm.
There's probably been a process of thought
Absolutely.
and consideration before going there. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow. So when it comes to family conflict, what are some of the things we can do to sort of put out some of those fires and maybe build stronger bonds, which I think is what our world needs right now,
Hmm.
is more
Hmm.
community.
Yeah, well, I think, family dynamics are always unique. It's interesting. If you think you're super spiritual and you're doing so well, go spend, you know, a minimum of 3 days with your family, and so many things will be shown to you. Um, you know, I'm the youngest of five children.
Mhm.
I was a huge surprise. So there's a big age gap between myself. There's 16 years between myself and the oldest, and then there were
Yeah,
twins as 14 years and 11. So I grew up like an only child, and I grew up in a very different kind of environment than my other siblings did. So right away that
yeah,
creates a me against them in many ways, in their way, in their mind, in their eyes.
yeah,
Second, my mother's 89 years old. She lives on her own. She's great, and I love going to visit. But after a few days, it's like, okay, like it's time to go. Like, you know what I mean? And so family will always raise things, and it can be beautiful because in many ways it will show you how you've healed or work you've done, and it can also show you other areas to see still keep growing on. I would say, one of the hardest things is when I feel when there's family tension that is not addressed, or there's a
yeah,
blame game going on. I think that is always a reflection of something more in the person. So, for example, if a sibling says to another sibling, you were always the favorite. You're doing this. This has been on there. In many ways, that is a much deeper wound about them, about
yeah,
how they've experienced love or where things are at. I think the big thing is, and it's easy, and I certainly have been sucked into this too at different times, to like get into the battle of it. No, I wasn't, and da da da, and that's because of this and that, and it gets nowhere, and it gets chaos, and it just creates more of a wedge.
it
So I
does.
think the best thing is, and it takes a lot, is just to kind of say, to listen and be like, wow, it sounds to me like there's still some hurt there, or it
Yeah,
sounds to me like there's something going on there, and to realize that that's kind of where they are. I think part of it is not getting pulled into that as much, which is easier said than done, but
mhm,
it is something that is kind of the best approach on that. I think the other thing is too, you don't have to be friends with your siblings,
that's
and
true.
you don't have to have this magical relationship with them that everyone thinks you're supposed to. And I really feel that's also part of spirituality, that yes, you were born in this family. Yes, you chose this family. Yes, you're called to love. But being in love doesn't mean you have to keep inflicting being there, or not having proper boundaries, or not,
Exactly.
being where you need to be and who you need to be. And that is something I think is very important, where sometimes you think, well, I just want them to, we all get along, or I don't want to not have them. Well, sometimes you have to realize the truest love I can show here is to create a boundary that I need to. Like, their energy where they are is not helping me and where I'm at. So maybe we need to keep a little bit of a distance in a respectful way. That's not bad.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I read a book years ago that I still, go back to when it comes to couples in conflict. It's called "Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You?"
Hmm.
And it's a bunch of scenarios where they actually show there's two ways to deal with a conflict. You can deal with it. I'd rather be right than anything. That's one way. The other way is a desire to understand. So it's either a desire to be right or a desire to understand. And if you come into the conversation with a desire to understand, you actually make space to listen to the other person. You may not agree with them in the end, but at least you've listened and you both might feel heard as a result, which is going to sort of calm the flames of
Hmm.
conflict at least a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that book to be very helpful.
Oh, I love the title of that book.
Yeah. Yeah, it was written by Jordan and Margaret Paul many years ago. Like, it can be found in used bookstores, but it's really great about communicating during conflict. It's well
Nice.
done. Yeah, it's really, really well done. We're going to take a brief commercial break because, believe it or not, we are at the halfway point already. And you're watching the Spirit Cafe show here on the New Thought Media Network. Don't go away because we're going to be right back with our wonderful guest, Brian Bachand.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
And we're back, and you probably noticed that we're missing our incredible Cheryl Rogers, our other co-host, and she is just taking a little self-care time. So Marg and I thought that was probably a good idea for her to do that. So here we are back, and we've been talking about conflict and conditional and unconditional love. Mark, do you have something to?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of Cheryl as an example of speaking one's needs. And so if we're looking at, this is like sort of a basic example, but if we're looking at conditional and unconditional love, Cheryl spoke her needs. And so unconditionally loving her, we said, yes, you take care of yourself, my dear. And unconditional love would be to guilt her and say, hey, you should be here. And, or not even having the mindset that, yes, it's okay. Right. So even if we said the words, yeah, it's okay. But you and I backstage going, damn, she should
Can you
be here.
believe it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, she just sent me a little question. She'd like, Brian, you to talk a little bit more about unconditional love, which is what Mark just touched on.
Of course.
Of course. Because I think we see a lot of that in our world today.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
How does that show up sometimes?
Well, I think, unconditional love can show up in, I think all of us, I'll just speak for myself. There are times all of us are showing conditional and unconditional. And I think it's something that you just have to own. You want to walk around thinking, oh, I am very much all about unconditional love. Yeah, that's great. But let's talk about reality and really test that. I'm sure it's a beautiful intention and that is the way to strive. But there are going to be parts of us that are still evolving that can have a conditional component. So, for example, like you're at the checkout line. Let's say you can't use this, you can't use the, self checkout because it's broken. So you have to get in the old fashioned line waiting in line. And then there's, it's like the tape, the receipt the receipt tape has to be done, or there's an issue. And, if you start judging the person in front of you saying, oh my God, they're so slow, or, they ask questions, I
Yeah.
think, that's a small thing of like, that's not very unconditional. It's very conditional. And there are going to be moments you're at a meeting, let's say you're at a meeting, you're listening to someone speak, and it's, you can start having a sense of like, just feeling something off, like, you used to see them in a light, but you don't like what they're saying. You don't agree with their opinion. So your tone changes. You start looking at them different. You treat them different. That could be an
Yeah.
unconditional. So it's going to show up in the ordinary moments of life. And
Mm-hmm.
they're beautiful gifts because they're invitations to come back, to check in, to say, I got to get back on track here. Or even with your spouse or with a family, and you mess up and you screw up and you say something, it happens. It's an invitation to apologize and come back to who you are. So I certainly know that's me and something I do. And, there are times like you can have this beautiful meditation and everything, and then something happens, after like 20 minutes later, and you can have that moment. That's okay, because as humans, we contrast and we expand, and that's the spirit in the human. So I think it's just being aware of the ordinary moments that you're going to see it, and being aware of that.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love your example. I relate well to examples like being in the grocery store and
Mhm.
somebody in front of me is not getting their change out quickly enough. And so that's sort of an everyday example. Sometimes I think in the textbook, you're learning something, you're evolving into this spiritual person, let's say, and the example in the textbook is something huge, like you've had
Mhm.
this argument with somebody, and so one can only relate to a big example.
Right.
Say about, okay, well, it's everyday life. It's the neighbor's dog who pooped on the lawn, or
Absolutely.
so it's all of those little things that I think when when I become aware of how I present in the world, take a moment, okay, I judged that, darn, let me see if I could shift that down. And I think that changes, that type of thinking changes the world. It,
Hmm.
yes, I
Yeah.
can, because it's this small moment, it's this
Hmm.
little incident.
Yeah.
And that is it. I mean, those small, ordinary moments, being spiritual is being aware of the small human ordinary moments. Because when you deal with the person who's annoying you, that they can't get their change out in front of you, or there's a price check because you're so PO'd because you're supposed to be in a rush and it's not there, and everything is just getting on your nerves at that moment. Those are the moments to come back to the love in your heart. That's the moment to be there. And, it's really, those are the ones that will help you when you're dealing with those bigger conflicts, like we're
Mhm.
talking about in the family. It builds up it's like, for example, like, when you go to the gym, it's great. Like, you do a big workout, but, you know, making sure that you're moving your body every day and you being aware that it keeps you
Mm.
fit. So those smaller moments are keeping you spiritually fit for when you have the bigger challenges of dealing with unconditional or conditional in a relationship, in a work environment, or in family.
Yeah. And I think too that um, for me, unconditional love is easiest for me on the days when I've had a good night's sleep, my bills are all paid, I got a roof over my head and food in my belly. Unconditional love is way easier
Hmm.
than when things are a little tight and a little tough, and um, trying to figure out um, how to maintain our loving nature. And when I look at some of the challenges, I think the what I loved about Marianne Williamson is she talked about if it's looking out of sorts, it's a call to love. If it
Hmm.
looks ugly, angry, whatever, it's a call to love. And if we can remember that, it can help us to show up in a different way as well.
Hmm. Hmm. I think you're right. But Barb, I just want to comment. I love what you said. It's easy to be unconditional love when you're feeling good and your bills are paid and it's sunny outside, and
Yeah,
the dishwasher's empty and the house is
yeah,
clean before people come in. It's great. Oh yeah, everyone's wonderful. It's
easy.
a lot. Yeah, it's a lot harder when it's pouring rain outside. You're not feeling great. You have a cold and a hacking cough that hasn't gone away, and you're in your
Your
third
infant kept
cough.
you up all
Yeah,
night.
yeah, exactly. And you have a deadline and you haven't begun your taxes and, whatever.
Yeah,
That's the invitation to kind of like, okay, how do we do it? And in those moments, it's not about trying to
yeah,
be big changes. It's about picking one small thing to just
exactly.
realign, to appreciate what is working. Well, I'm really grateful that at least I'm not outside today. I can work from home. I
Yeah,
appreciate this. That shifts and helps realign us.
yeah, that helps for sure. And Cheryl was just asking, she's on my phone. She was just asking about, do we have to love ourselves in order to love others?
Hmm.
Does there need to be that self-love?
Well, without a doubt, that's the whole mission of why we're here. Without
It's
a doubt,
true.
the whole mission of why I believe why we have come into this world is that reconnection back to who we are, which is
Yeah,
love. And that does help. And you know, I think it's Gabby Bernstein, who's, a New York Times best-selling author. I'm sure so many people are familiar with her. One of the things she says, which I love, and I fully agree, relationships are spiritual assignments.
yes,
And
they are.
so many ways, the relationships that are in our life, and relationships can be, the annoying neighbor with the dog that keeps pooping
Yeah,
on your lawn, to the relationship with your spouse, to the relationship with a colleague that maybe just drives you crazy every day because they're, you know, and they're always coming asking questions, even if you would explain it. And, they're always there. They always find you, whatever that is.
yeah,
They're spiritual assignments. of helping you grow in your own self-love, of how you
Mhm.
treat them, how you see them, how you engage. So absolutely, to answer that question, it all comes back to self-love, because then it trickles out to
Yeah,
loving fully to the
yeah.
other person.
And the thing is we can't give what we don't have,
Hmm.
which is the
Yes,
the other side.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And I
Brian,
think
when
go ahead.
oh,
Go ahead, Mark.
you opened a company, am I correct in
That's
that?
right.
And it was called Evolution?
Yeah, it's still called Evolution.
Okay, very good. And I'm just trying to put the pieces together. And then the pandemic hit.
So,
So
yeah.
Nice
something
timing, by
shifted
the way.
there.
Yeah, well, so I opened the company launched on November 11th, 11/11, 2019.
Yeah,
So, it was great. It had launched in November, and, I was very fortunate to get some really great clients out of the gate. And then the new year started. I was still in a great spot. And then the pandemic hit. And it was interesting. My intention was to really have a physical space as well. And so I could do, in-person things. And then really that was a bigger focus. But I have to say, when the pandemic hit, I remember it was like the second day of the lockdown, the third day, and I was seated on my couch and looking out my window. I was in Toronto, and it was like kind of a light snow. It was in March, and it was kind of like, oh my gosh, we're like, it was kind of fun. That first like week, we didn't all know what was happening. Kind of like it's like a snow day. Like, we're home for 2 weeks. That's what we're told. And but I remember having this overwhelming intuitive sense. Never in my wildest dreams would I believe that my company called Evolution, the timing of this would be so profound.
yeah,
I
no
remember
kidding.
having that distinct feeling sitting there, because I knew there was something very big happening, and things were going to be evolving, and people were going to be changing. And it was much easier during the pandemic to start the company, because it gave me an opportunity to go all online.
Yeah,
So it was amazing. I started, really getting into, the social media, and to doing tons of podcast interviews. All my clients were online, and it opened up this bridge of more people to serve.
yeah,
And I realized, I said, I don't want an office space. Like, I want everything virtual. I want my team to be virtual. And I love that sense, because now my team is, you know, one's in Italy, one's in Toronto, one's in Kenya, and I love that. And my clients are, mostly North America. And so it makes it great. Just a sip of water here.
Mhm. So
yeah.
was there a conditional, unconditional love example as that transition happened, or did you see the positivity in it right away?
In the
Was
pandemic, or for myself?
um both,
Okay.
because it seemed like it happened almost, well, not simultaneously, but November to March is not a long time.
Right.
And the world is like, oh my God, what's happening? And you just opened up a new company. And so was there a lot of shifting going on in your
Yeah,
mind? And
I loved it. I'll be honest with you. Out of the gate, I was one of the very few. I mean, everyone through the pandemic touched every human being in the world in a different way.
Yeah,
And I feel all of us had our moments of kind of, at a certain time. Some it hit very early with fear, what was going on. Some had it, a little bit later. Mine came in 2021, where there was a little bit of a wall that hit that was quite strong. So I just want to preface that, that was my side. But at the very beginning, for the first year or so, I thought it was amazing. I loved being there. And I think the unconditional part was, I loved being of service for so many. I started doing these. I was a guest on, I currently serve as the chair of the board of an organization called Access Employment in Toronto. It helps new Canadians find employment. And I started doing all these like guest spots on helping, especially newcomers, those who have recently immigrated, who just arrived in like to a new country, and there they are. Like, I'm here, half my family is still waiting to come over. I don't know when they're coming. I'm alone.
Mm.
And I would do all these things about transitioning during that time in their job search. And I loved being of service during that time. And it was beautiful. For myself, there was an unconditional moment really in the past year with the work. As I see right now, they're putting up my, website, a new website, new focus, and different things. There was a profound moment recently of letting go of an older identity of when I started the company
Mhm.
and falling more in love with who I am and my messaging of what I want to offer.
Oh,
And that enabled me to more fully embrace services and what I'm offering. And part of that's being an entrepreneur, I think, having your company, and it takes time as you go through. But part of it on a deeper, soulful level is really that sense of falling in love with, wow, like I see my gifts. I see how this will serve. I see how this will impact. I see how this is
yeah,
part of the world's evolution. And so for me, it became more about that unconditional aspect of loving myself through that role. And that was really beautiful.
that's awesome. The pandemic, when it hit, was such a loud moment of reconfiguring our lives. I remember my daughter wanting to learn how to bake bread, and we're going, where can we get yeast? Right. And we found a store that had 2 packages. That's all
Hmm.
they had. So she was able to learn how to make bread. I think what I found when the pandemic hit, I'd been using Zoom at that point already for 4 years.
Hmm.
So I was well equipped. I was serving 2 churches at the time. And so we immediately transitioned to Zoom for our services and didn't skip a beat. It
Hmm.
was it was easy because I'd been doing it for so long for classes that putting the
Hmm.
service online was another easy feat. But it's the whole interrupt that happened and the things that were interrupted, I think were so important is we're looking at evolving now. We have to find a new way of being on this planet because we're kind of destroying it. And we have the solution.
Hmm.
Less, 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 not more, more, more. We tend to be over consumers and me rather than we. And so what do you think would be sort of a great next step or whatever for people as we evolve into a whole new system of being in the world? How
Mm.
where we can actually start working for each other's best outcomes rather than just our own.
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, I love that question on a couple things. So, first of all, I think it's my company's named Evolution twice for a reason,
Mhm.
because as you evolve, so does the world evolve. So,
Yeah.
when you are taking responsibility for yourself and who you are also helping the world, the collective, the wider energy also evolve, not just for the current people who are here, but for the generations that will follow. So
Generations.
I think, the most important thing is to realize, the world is changing, and the systems are changing, and it may look, oh my gosh, everything looks horrible and there's things, but there's actually, in my belief, there's actually more good going on. And I
Mhm, I
think
agree.
you're seeing that, there's a shift. I firmly believe, like, so many industries will be changing. The banking industry will be changing. It may not be in our lifetime seeing it all, but things are changing. Part of that begins with individuals getting reconnected to themselves in a deeper way. And what I mean by that is, I just did today, I taught a class, and it was all about, reconnecting and opening up to your intuition. And intuition is a huge part of every single person's life. And to know what is your intuition, how to listen to that, how to bring that into business, into your relationships. And I think that's going to become even more and more common. So I think, first of all, I think for individuals to continue to do their own work is very important. Second, I think one of the most important things is, don't be afraid to release your identity. So often, I think, we get so
Yeah.
caught up in, I went to school for so many years, this is where I am, and this is where I live, or something. You, if you open yourself up to releasing what you believe is your identity, so often something else will come in to help guide you to be there.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. The ego wants to hang on because it's safe, it's risk averse, it's all there. But it not to be afraid. So many times people say, I'm struggling to know my purpose. Well, the reason you're struggling is you're trying to hold on so much to what you think you're supposed to be. So if you at least open yourself up to, I'm not sure, what the next step is, but I'm open. I'm open to seeing where things are at. Then there's a freedom to explore and evolve and just follow that. It's not about figuring it out. It's about being open, listening to the intuition, listening to what's showing up, seeing, testing, and it will be shown. And the more people are doing that, the more they will connect, the more there will be joy. And naturally, other things will fall into place. Like, gee, I don't need this humongous house that I thought I needed with so many things. Things that used to feed you won't anymore because
Yeah.
your energy's changed. And that's okay, and that's good. That's a beautiful thing.
It is for sure. Mark, did you have something you wanted to ask or add?
No, I'm not going to ask it or add it, but I got to say that, when we were talking about the pandemic and we're talking about conflict resolution, and I'm thinking of the spillover that is still happening with the opinions of, was it a pandemic? Should I get a shot? Shouldn't I? And the judgment that happened, with people's choices. And so that's like a whole other show. But what a huge example of conflict resolution.
Hmm. And
know?
conditional and unconditional love. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
I'm American, and you know, yesterday, I don't want to get, yesterday was Super Tuesday. And so you're seeing results and seeing where things are at. And, it's quite challenging, when I go back, to the States and see family and friends, so often people will say it's becoming more and more challenging if someone disagrees or someone's a particular supports a particular party or a particular candidate. It becomes quite divisive on that. And I think, those are the ordinary moments, like I was talking about
Those
earlier,
are
where
the
you'll be able
ordinary
to
moments.
see the conditional, unconditional. And it's not easy. It's not
Yeah.
easy, because it feels deep. Um, but it's something it is in that environment where you have to continue to be aware of.
And I
Mhm.
think there's such a difference between Canadian and American politics. The divisiveness is not to the same degree here as it is in the US.
Oh, it doesn't exist, in my opinion. I mean, I just, coming north, it was so funny. I didn't have the privilege to vote in Canada, when I arrived. And I remember
Yeah.
it was the first election for the prime minister. It was Justin Trudeau's the first time he was running. And, I'm not saying I endorsing him or whatever, but I remember us thinking, wow, that's really exciting. Like, you have this young prime minister, he's got
Yeah.
elected. No one talked about it. No one talked about it. The day afterwards, no one talked about it. And I find it very different. Like,
Yeah.
it's night and day. And I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. I think, and I'll speak as an American, I think the American one is to the other extreme ridiculousness of some of the stuff. I think it's just insanity. And then at the other time, I see other ones. I'm like, well, yeah, you can pick it up. Like, you need to pick it up a little bit. You need a little more dialogue, a little more oomph. So I think there's going to be something in the middle. So yeah, it is. It's very diverse. But
Some middle
unfortunately,
ground.
the American politics influences so much
Yeah, it really
globally.
does.
So yeah.
I think I think it helps though. Like what came up for me when Trump was elected was that sort of changed the American superpower, smartest people on the planet thing, where the world was kind of going, "You did what?" But what I loved about it was all the dirt that had been hiding under the surface. Well, it wasn't really hiding, but was brought all the way to the top. It's like spring cleaning. He was like the cleaning woman coming in, emptying all the cupboards, creating a huge mess so that we could see all the dirt, so we could go in and wash it and clean it and fix it and put it back together. So that's where I think we are right now, is that trying to figure out how to clean it all up and put it back together as a human race.
Well, I think, and I'm sensitive of time too, but, to kind of, from myself, with going back to the topic of conditional, unconditional, and to build on what you said, Barbara, I think so often when there's destructive or a strong personality, it could be in the business, right?
Mhm.
New
Yep.
boss comes in and, all this stuff comes up, or, there could be something in a family situation that
Yep.
happens, sibling, something tragic or something that's really strong. Sometimes it can be a lot of things that is an opportunity, and many times the universe works that way, that it does raise up something else that either needs to be healed or shown. And it's
Yeah.
that invitation to go from, unconditional to conditional, to see what that is. So I'm a
Exactly.
firm believer, when there's global things, or more importantly, in a family and yourself, when those things start to show up, it's because it's an invitation back to that love, that self-love. And I think that's why some
Yeah.
of those things happen. It's all about the learning and coming back to it.
I agree. I agree.
Mhm.
So we're down to our last 3 minutes. Time flies. And what is one thing you'd love people to take away from this conversation today?
I would say, for each person, something else will resonate. But I think, for me, and this is something I'm just very strong about, pay attention to the ordinary moments.
I
Pay
like that.
attention to the ordinary, simple moments of conditional, unconditional when you're feeling it, because that's really where the divine, your guides, are trying to show you something. And it's just, and don't judge yourself when you screw up, because you're going to. I'll be the first one to say it, but it's an invitation to forgive. It's an invitation to be open. And I think that's the most important thing. Pay attention to the ordinary moments, because that's where you'll grow in love.
I love it. I love it. Mark, what about you?
Oh, I
Final
so
thought.
appreciate, yeah, paying attention to the ordinary moments, because I believe that adds up when you pay attention. I think it adds up to the bigger picture. And something that I'll take away and ponder is to release your own identity. Those words were pretty powerful. So thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
You're
thank you
welcome.
for that, Brian, because I know that's something for me that I noticed a few years ago is, I don't really want to be seen. There's a part of me that's hiding, and it's opening that up and going, wait a minute, you're created by this remarkable creator that is intelligent and created everything of value for whatever the universe needed at this point in time. So
Mm,
I'm needed, you're needed, we're all needed,
that's
and we all
beautiful.
have something unique and special to bring to the table. And if we bring it, our world will be so much better, so much brighter. And Cheryl Rogers put in the chat, thank you, Brian, Mark, Barbara, and Deja. Great show. So way to
Mm.
go, Cheryl. She wasn't here, but she was. And you mentioned briefly intuition. And the one thing I taught my daughter I have 4 children, but I got smart with the last one. Big age difference between the top 3 and the bottom one.
Mhm.
But one thing I learned from her is the idea of stranger danger.
Hmm.
No, what I taught her was trust your intuition. You
Mm,
will
Mm.
know when you're safe, and you will know when there's something not quite right. Pay
mm,
attention to that.
mhm.
Brian, thank you, thank you, thank you. Mark,
you.
thank you.
Thank
Cheryl,
you.
we missed you. Thank you for watching. And Deja, you're a rock star. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. You're watching the New Thought Media Network. This is Spirit Cafe Show and our wonderful guest, Brian, my great co-host, Mark, and we will be back again next week with a different guest. We are going to have somebody talking about grief and dying. Erica Johnson will be with us next week. So be sure to tune in. Bye, everyone.
Bye for now. Thanks, Brian.